In 1966, at the peak of the Cold War, the United States conducted Operation Chrome Dome. This operation consisted of always having a strategic bomber flying near the Soviet Union with nuclear bombs. One of the routes involved flying over Spain and Italy to get closer to the westernmost part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Afterwards, the plane would return following a similar route. This mission was carried out about 6 times a day. It was completely routine. They refueled en route using a plane from the Zaragoza base and also refueled in flight on the return trip. On January 17, 1966, a historic event took place thanks to a tanker plane that departed from the Moran base. The B-52, carrying out the mission, had 4 1.5 megaton thermonuclear bombs, each about 70 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Each one, well then, the plane was already about to carry out the second in-flight refueling when apparently it was approaching the tanker too quickly and ended up colliding with it, destroying both planes and dropping the 4 thermonuclear bombs over Spain. The concept of mid-air refueling dates back to the early days of aviation when aircraft had limited range, and it has been a long-standing dream in the field. But it only became a reality in 1923. At that time, the military knew how important it was to achieve it, and that's why this method gradually evolved until the Korean War. The systems were developed well enough to perform an in-flight refueling during a real mission. Thanks to this idea, for example, the plane of the President of the United States can keep flying indefinitely in case there is a nuclear conflict. There are 2 refueling techniques. There are tanker planes that can supply fuel using one of these techniques, or even both. The planes that carry the fuel are called tanker planes. The first method is known as the probe and drogue system, in English, probe and drogue. This system consists of using a hose that extends several meters behind the tanker plane. At the tip, it has a kind of basket designed to keep the hose in the optimal position, so that a plane can hook it with a small probe that comes out of its nose. The use of the basket is crucial because it ensures that the hose stays stable in the air instead of swinging aggressively, thus putting both planes at risk. Although sometimes if the basket breaks or if the environmental conditions are very bad, it can happen that the hose starts whipping around. As shown earlier in the video, improper execution of these operations can result in severe accidents. Normally, airplanes have this probe hidden and it only extends when they want to refuel. The F-18 and Eurofighter have it hidden, but other planes like the Rafale always have it outside, unable to conceal it. This increases the airplane's drag, but significantly reduces design costs. This way of refueling is passive for the tanker plane, which means it extends the hose backward. And it stays within certain speed and altitude parameters, and it's the receiving aircraft that must approach and make the connection. When you're there refueling, whether with the basket or with the boom, at a certain speed, always at the same speed.
That is recorded by the nations in a standardization document, so it's very well documented there. What are the rendezvous approach speeds? Everyone works with the same document and everyone knows what procedure they have to follow to report it.
Watching videos of professional pilots might make it look easy, but in September 2020, Airbus invited me to the facilities where military pilots train, and I was able to get into several real simulators. In this one, for example, from inside of 400 meters, they explained to me how the procedure to catch the basket works. I tried it, and it was absolutely impossible. They also have a Eurofighter in-flight refueling simulator with virtual reality goggles, providing a totally immersive experience. I was able to try it, and I can guarantee you that it's way too complicated to catch the basket. The plane is extremely sensitive to the controls, and in the end, what I was doing was putting it into a loop of instability by trying to correct those lateral movements. In the end, I didn't make it. The goal is to nail the approach speed perfectly, because if you start going too fast, your speed will be much higher than that of the tanker plane. Time will fly by quickly. Unlike a car, a plane can't brake to slow down. Generally, to lose speed, you perform maneuvers with turns to lose energy. But when you're trying to nail a refueling with precision, it's not possible to do maneuvers, so there's no way to slow down. Excessive speed leads to overshooting. Also, you have to take into account the inertia of these aircraft engines because it takes several seconds for them to respond. That's why it's very easy to do it wrong. It's the same as if you start making corrections with the controls to the sides. By the time I realized it, I had already gone too far and was in an oscillation. So the key is to make super smooth movements with your hand. The probe and drogue system has many benefits. As a thin, extendable, and retractable hose, it can be fitted on nearly any aircraft. For example, the United States Navy has some F-18 jets prepared exclusively to refuel other fighters. They attach external fuel tanks to them, and that way they don't need to land an entire squadron of F-18s just to refuel them. Another advantage is that this system can be installed on the wings of larger aircraft, such as the A400-meter or the A330-meter multi-role tanker transport. That way, 2 aircraft could be refueled at the same time. Notably, Boeing is developing the MQ-25 drone to conduct refueling missions from aircraft carriers, ensuring these tasks are always performed by drones. As you can imagine, it's extremely expensive to have an F-18 flying just to refuel other planes, because it's designed for war, not for calm flights. That's why a drone could carry out this mission at a much lower cost, although this idea is still in its early stages. While the drone has flown, it hasn't yet taken off or landed on an aircraft carrier, which is the most complicated part. The second technique for refueling is to use what's known as a boom. For this second method, a larger plane is needed since the boom is a solid structure similar to a bar that extends from the central rear part of the plane. For example, the United States operates it on its KC-135 or KC-46. In contrast, Airbus offers the A330 multi-role tanker transport. As evident, these are sizable aircraft. And unlike the basket and probe method, this is an active system for the tanker aircraft, which means that the refueling aircraft simply approaches up to a certain distance. And it's an operator on the tanker aircraft who maneuvers the boom, moving the aerodynamic surfaces it has to hit the target. Because the aircraft that use this refueling method must have a port where the boom can connect to transfer fuel. In older aircraft like the KC-135, the boom operator was in the rear of the plane, lying down, and thanks to a small window he could see the receiving aircraft. In modern aircraft like the A330 multi-role tanker transport, this task is done from the cockpit behind the pilots, using a rear-mounted camera system. It's important to keep in mind that for the aircraft receiving fuel, it's very difficult to stay just a few meters behind the other plane, since it's constantly in the turbulent wake of the aircraft in front. The A330 multi-role tanker transport has a rear light system to guide the receiving aircraft into the perfect position if it's not correctly positioned. That day, I also simulated being the boom operator of a 330 multi-role tanker transport, which is in the cabin right behind the pilot. To operate it, there are 2 joysticks. One for the right hand, which controls the movement of the boom from left to right, up and down. And with the left hand, you control the depth, because the boom can extend and retract. If you look at the videos, I'm wearing glasses, and it's not because I think I'm a fighter pilot, but because I need to gain 3-dimensional vision. The operator must wear 3D glasses so that when the boom starts to extend, he can see whether it's going well or not. And the quality you get with these glasses is incredible. The procedure is to first place the boom in the correct position. That is done with the right-hand joystick. And then, once it's in the perfect position, you can extend the boom with your left hand so that it goes into the opening. But you would never do both things at the same time. I was able to try refueling several aircraft, an A330 multi-role tanker transport, an F-16, or even an F-35. I learned that refueling fighter jets is more complex than large aircraft due to their constant movement. Also, you have to be careful not to hit their cockpit when they approach. That's why, for those that have the intake at the rear of the fuselage like the F-16 or the F-35, it's best to move the boom to the side until they're very close, and then lower it and maneuver. There are other planes like the F-15 that have the intake on the side, which apparently makes it a bit more difficult. When both planes are about to connect, the operator has the option to cancel the refueling in case of emergency if he sees that there could be danger. To do this, he presses a joystick button. This instantly transmits an emergency abort signal to the A330 multi-role tanker transport pilot and receiving aircraft. To move forward, the tanker pilot would maximize power, while the receiving aircraft would reduce power to move back. In this way, both aircraft would separate as quickly as possible. Several years ago, an incident occurred during an airborne warning and control system aerial refueling mission, resulting in multiple injuries. It seemed that the boom hit the target, but the airborne warning and control system moved too much and disconnected. When it approached again, the airborne warning and control system got too close, and the pilot performed a strange maneuver to avoid a collision inside the plane. This maneuver resulted in a period of weightlessness, so everyone started flying through the air. This is because, unlike the first in-flight refueling method, the receiving plane's pilot can't really see what's happening. Look, for example, here I am inside an A330 multi-role tanker transport simulator, and I requested the pilot to refuel one A330 multi-role tanker transport from another A330 multi-role tanker transport. Exactly what I was able to practice, but from the boom's point of view? Well, now I would be in the cockpit, and as you can see in the videos, you can't see anything from the cockpit. The receiving plane must get closer, then the boom operator inserts it. From the cockpit, you can't see anything. And honestly, it gives me a pretty bad feeling. If you look, there are 2 control points. This is for correcting a student who isn't doing something properly. There are several public NATO documents regarding how these operations should be carried out. For those interested, there's a lot of information included. When planes refuel mid-air, they fly in formation on the right side of the tanker plane. From behind, they'll stay flying on the right, and the first plane will move to the left to refuel. If the method used is the boom, then it will position itself in the center, but if refueling is going to be done with the hoses on the wings, it will go toward the left wing, and another plane will simultaneously position itself on the right wing for refueling both at the same time. When the process for these planes is finished, they will wait to the left of the tanker plane, where it can see them. Once refueling is complete, all aircraft will depart from the tanker, flying in formation, but they will always move forward or ascend, since there may be other planes approaching to refuel. And this is always done from behind and from below, so to avoid accidents, when you leave, you will do it forward. At this moment, Boeing and Airbus are looking into in-flight refueling. With the boom, it could be automatic to automate the process and in the future be able to do without the boom operator. Currently, Airbus already has it certified on its A330 multi-role tanker transport to be able to refuel certain specific aircraft. It's important to understand that, for this process to be certified, the computer on the tanker aircraft would have to know perfectly the behavior of the receiving aircraft to understand in all possible situations how the trailing aircraft might behave. You must input where each aircraft has its fuel intake, making the certification process quite complicated. But an even more surprising idea is being considered for the future. It consists of the tanker aircraft taking control over the aircraft that is going to refuel, so that the computer of the tanker aircraft carries out the refueling operation, achieving the perfect speed, placement, and more. That is, the pilot of the receiving aircraft, once he gets close enough to the tanker aircraft, won't have to do absolutely anything. In fact, this is something that Airbus already has quite advanced. In November 2023, I was invited to a drone test in Huelva, southern Spain. We'll discuss this in a future video. Well, and here comes the question, how long does it take to refuel a plane? Well, the boom can transfer over 3,000 kilograms per minute. A regular car gas station pumps about 40 kilograms per minute. That's about 330. Multi-role tanker transport would fill your car's tank in half a second. In fact, for fighter jets, it's limited and supplies fuel at a much lower rate, because otherwise it could actually push it downward from the force of the fuel entering the plane. In the United States, the Air Force uses the boom system, which is why planes like the F-16, F-22, or B-2 have a port to supply fuel. On the other hand, the Navy, since it can't carry aircraft with the boom on aircraft carriers, uses the probe and drogue system. Planes like the F-18 have a probe that comes out from the nose because they are designed to operate from aircraft carriers. Therefore, the method they would use to refuel would be with the basket. Modern military planes can refuel in flight, removing range limitations, as mentioned in the introduction example. In the Palomares incident, a B-52 took off from the United States, flew nearly to the Soviet Union, and returned to the United States without stopping as it could refuel mid-air. For those wondering about the Palomares incident, the nuclear bombs did not detonate. 2 of them were recovered in good condition, the other 2 broke apart and scattered contaminated particles around the south of Spain. If you're over 30 and live in Spain, you likely know about this incident, but younger Spaniards may not be familiar with it. Nowadays, aerial refueling has become almost routine, and all military pilots are used to it. But we mustn't forget that it's actually a very dangerous maneuver. The A330 multi-role tanker transport is currently the most advanced aerial refueling aircraft. Undoubtedly, all countries are choosing to buy this aircraft. In the coming months, I'll release a video discussing it. It has undoubtedly become one of my favorites. When you watch that video, I'm sure it will become one of yours too. Finally, I can now announce a new launch in my clothing store. 7 incredible designs available for t-shirts and sweatshirts, each one with an aeronautical story behind it. Longtime followers will understand the designs. To demonstrate the detail, here's the SR-71, but it's not a random design. It's flying at maximum speed, and there are several explosions behind it. And the phrase in English says, "My enemies must love me when I fly. They set off fireworks above them." This is because around 4,000 missiles were fired to bring it down. Well, not a single one was ever able to hit it. Check out Airborne X Shop if you want to understand all these stories. Remember, the aircraft carrier collection will be retired at the end of 2023, so buy your most aeronautical Christmas gifts now while you can. The link to my book, The Manual to Think Like an Aerospace Engineer, will be in the description. Thanks for watching, see you next time.